Welcome into the All Things Mizzou podcast presented by Missouri Tigers on SI. I'm Joey Van Zummeren. I cover Mizzou football and basketball, and I'm joined as always by Michael Stamps to discuss a hectic early transfer portal window for the Missouri Tigers. 7 editions so far, many losses. So a lot to talk about today. Michael, just how are you feeling through this first week and a half of the transfer portal being open for Mizzou?
Well, it's nice to be on Christmas break for one. I think everyone, it's nice to get home and all that fun stuff. So wonderful to be back home in the beautiful state of Nebraska. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, I guess, and I think it was predictable that it was going to be crazy and surprising. But I think those are two words you can accurately use to describe not just Missouri's transfer portal so far, but everyone's. I mean, there's rumors thrown around about people getting money, and guys are in the portal for 10 hours before they're on their next team, or we're entering with no contact tags, or uh, there are players signing NIL deals to stay with their team for another season. It's just crazy, and there's a lot. It's deep, and you can get really deep into it. But on the surface level for Missouri, I'd like to think they've done a pretty good job filling some holes, primarily on defense so far. They have, there's a few common trends that we can get into with some of their additions once we go more in depth with that. But a lot of guys with eligibility left who are productive. A couple from power conference teams, others younger guys not on group of 5 teams, but we're doing their thing there. So there's a lot to be excited about with the additions. And I mean, obviously the thing with the transfer portal is you lose all these guys, and the losses Missouri suffered so far, some of them have definitely been surprising and less than ideal, and I think people are going to be justifiably disappointed. But we don't really know how those are going to work out until next season, or maybe a few seasons down the road, given the eligibility left of some of the guys that have left. So it's a crapshoot, but it's been fun, and I don't think it's ending or getting any less fun here over the next couple of weeks.
I think as a college football fan, you really just have to, with your specific team, not live and die by every move they get and loss they make. You can't get super excited and place all your chips in on them getting this one guy. But then on the same page, you can't get so down when they lose one guy. And I think we've definitely seen that with Mizzou Twitter over these past few weeks, and Eli Drinkwitz even shouted them out yesterday in his press conference, saying it's going to be all right. Like, I absolutely understand when you lose. I mean, specifically 3 guys that are true freshmen right now. When you lose those guys that we were, the whole fan base was so excited about just 6 months ago, and were big parts of Missouri's future plans. I absolutely understand the disappointment with that, but also there's a lot of reasons to be excited. Like you said, Michael, I think so far in the transfer portal, they've checked off their 2 biggest needs defensively at linebacker and then at safety. Offense kind of lacking behind a little bit there. Slow but steady progress there. I think their 2 additions so far offensively have been home runs. So a lot to be excited about if you're a Mizzou fan. And I think to that point of what I was talking about, of just you never know what your roster is really going to look like, and it's not really worth going on that ride of a roller coaster of emotions if you're a fan. Eli Drinkwitz had some interesting comments yesterday talking about this. He talked specifically about freshmen leaving the program, and it kind of reminded me of what we were talking about in our last episode about 2 weeks ago, of just the fact of the Missouri's idea that they've built their program on over these last couple of seasons, of guys that come in as lower star prospects or even high star prospects, but are raw athletes, and then turning them into NFL draft picks. And that's what they've been built on, is really an impossible brand to have now. And so Eli Drinkwitz talked about that. He talked about freshmen not giving a proper chance. I found it interesting when he was asked just very vaguely about freshmen leaving the portal, and Eli Hoff, St. Louis Post-Dispatch reporter, was saying when a guy only is here for 12 months, and Drinkwitz corrected him and said 6 months. A lot of interesting things that I think Drinkwitz over time, I mean, it's not like he's happy about it, but he's definitely come to accept, and I think coaches all around the country are going to. And there is no such thing as year-to-year certainty. That's what I asked him about. Of how do you even attempt to plan your roster out for the next few years? And you really can't. You're really just wasting time at that point. I think it's fine to bring in freshmen that are raw athletes. Your Williams Winery, pretty much all three of those guys that have left. Aiden Glover also transferred, but wasn't really in the picture for the long-term plans like Courtney Crutchfield, Kawan Lacey, and Williams were. You really can't plan out the picture for them. You can recruit them and hope for the best, develop them as usual, and then whatever your roster looks like, it looks like, and you just kind of have to stay on your feet and make the best additions you can through the portal every single season. So there's that part of it, and I know a lot of Mizzou fans have been getting frustrated with players, and I appreciated that Drinkwitz said in his press conference too, to not get mad at the players, and to not hate the system, or not hate the players, hate the game. And as I wrote today, I absolutely understand what people value as college football fans and what coaches value of development, sticking through with something, going through adversity, and the relationships you can build with time. I absolutely understand that, but the transfer portal and the NIL system does not incentivize that at all. And I think I've said before too, I think NIL is an amazing thing. I think players should absolutely be compensated, but without a system in place, and as Drinkowitz said, who's in charge of all of this to set rules for every team and every program in the nation, it becomes really difficult. And these players just kind of have to fend for themselves, I guess you could say, and make the most of their college football careers, because in this sport, nothing is guaranteed at all. So that's my long ramble on this, my thoughts on where the transfer portal is at now. How do you feel with all this, Michael?
Uh, I completely agree with you. And one thing that I always like to come back to and think about as someone who's so intrigued and entertained by the high school recruiting cycle, just following where players go and where they sign and all that fun stuff. Um, the value in bringing in, 20, 25 high school guys is decreasing. And I remember Eli Drinkwitz, way back in the season saying he has a number in mind for, how many guys they want to sign each season. And I would be inclined to know if that number, with how crazy the transfer portal is. And now that you see multiple true freshmen hit the transfer portal, four or five true freshmen, I believe, five. Now that you see five true freshmen from this last 2024 class at the transfer portal, does that make you rethink how many guys you bring in each class? Maybe are we only thinking about bringing in 15 or 14 guys? If that many are going to transfer each time, then it makes you wonder if there's less value, and is there less value in these top ranked prospects? Because I've been on this soapbox multiple times before, where these high school football rankings are so they're based around athleticism and potential, and a lot of these guys, a lot of these your Williams Wineries, these freak athletes at these positions, your star defensive ends or offensive linemen or receivers and running backs. These guys are all track athletes or basketball players, and they throw up these crazy track numbers. There's cornerbacks who are the fastest high school 100-meter dash runners in the country. But it doesn't translate. It doesn't translate right away, and they transfer after a season. So it just makes you wonder if there's less value in recruiting those top-ranked guys who are not solely there based on athleticism. That's an unfair judgment. But a lot of it is projection and potential, and a key component of that is athleticism and how fast you are and strong you are, and how far you can throw a shot put, or how fast you can run a 100-yard or meter dash. So I think that's getting de-incentivized and devalued, because those roles are replaced after a season by a productive group of five player who has proven themselves after a season or two, right? And even I'm trying to think of I mean, maybe not the best example, but obviously Missouri brings in Kevin Coleman, right? And then Crutchfield leaves. Coleman's proven for multiple seasons. I don't know how many off the top of my head. He's proven for 3 seasons, on a high level. And Crutchfield isn't. Not that he can't be a productive player, but we don't know that yet. So it's an interesting question about the value of high school talent, especially with the number of athletes in the transfer portal right now. I don't know the exact number. I think it's probably pushing towards 2,000, which is just ridiculous. And you're seeing a lot of productive FCS players come up a level and move up a level and play in either Power Five or Group of Five football, which isn't unusual. But I think some of these higher ranked FCS guys are starting to go to bigger schools now because there's such a high value on production and win now players. And it also makes you contemplate, are we going to start seeing more of these 5 and 4-star talents or these freak athletes and high potential freshmen? Are we going to start seeing them go to not your blue chip schools, not your Georgia, your Alabama, Florida, LSU, Ohio State, Texas, Michigan, or Oregon, these schools that recruit over and over the best 4 and 5-star talent in the country? It makes you wonder if we're going to start seeing, these top ranked prospects go to schools where they can make an immediate impact and then try to move up a level. So I think the value of high school recruiting is, I don't want to say it's in jeopardy, but it's definitely in flux. It's different than it ever has been because, like you said, there is no incentive for developing players at high level schools for a couple of years now.
Look, you're going to have to pay really good players at some point. So why would you do it out of high school? Why would you do it when they're 18, 19 years old, when they're 20, 21, much more developed, probably going to be transferring elsewhere? So, yeah, I don't know. And I still think we're still talking about it. I mean, obviously, because it's defining the college football world, but we're still talking about it, 3 seasons in at this point? Because it's constantly changing everything about the sport. It's changing how NFL draft scouts evaluate talent and how the NFL draft works too, especially in the middle rounds. So there's a lot of interesting facets to this that, I mean, there is, like, I think revenue sharing is a good idea, but not really sure when there's really going to be some really strong regulations that bring this to a stable point. So that's that. In Missouri, though, all we got to talk about is the players Missouri is adding and losing. So taking it back to that picture, first off, I guess we'll start off with the losses here. First off, so we talked about it a few weeks ago with some of these guys, the earlier entries, but Mekhi Miller, the wide receiver, Philip Roche, the safety, Orion Phillips, the punter, he landed with Utah. Will Safford's the punter. Williams Nwaneri transferred to Nebraska, joining his high school coach. South Carolina, or Jalen Brown transferred over to South Carolina. And then Quan Lacey to Ole Miss, Aiden Glover, Brayshawn Littlejohn, and then you have Courtney Crutchfield, the latest addition to that. So, I mean, pretty much like we talked about, I don't think anything new to add there of the 4 freshmen now that really seemed promising. Disappointing to lose them, and not too much to add there position-wise. Besides, I guess, that running back and wide receiver, where Missouri has added players. First off, with Kevin Coleman from Mississippi State, just a dynamic slot playmaker. Like I said, Michael has been productive for 3 years. Start off with Jackson State, with Coach Prime there, then to Louisville, and then this past season with Mississippi State. Productive at all 3 levels. Like you mentioned, Michael, and Eli Drinkwood said it yesterday, valuing production over potential, which is just a very unfortunate state of where we're at, I think. But again, you pretty much have to be all in every single year, especially when you're kind of riding the momentum that Missouri is. And so I think first off, this is the Luther Burden replacement, if you will. Obviously, nobody is expecting him to go out there and be Luther Burden, but he can play in the slot. definitely shifty with the ball in his hands, and especially with how this offense operates. I mean, we'll see who that get at quarterback, and that definitely colors how we view this entire offense. But with the scheme, having a guy over the middle that can make plays is huge, and be interesting to see where Daniel Blood fits into this conversation now, because he kind of has some of that same skill set. But Kevin Coleman comes in with 1 year of eligibility left, so kind of a perfect bridge from a lot of the younger guys they have developing in here. So, Michael, what are your thoughts on Mr. Coleman, a St. Louis product?
Well, it's fun to bring him back. It's interesting that he's entered the transfer portal twice now, and it takes this many times for him to end up in his home state. So I guess it's fitting now that he'll finish off his career presumably in his home state and close to home. But yeah, like you said, Luther Burden-esque replacement. Good slot guy. I think he's a bit of an underrated route runner. He's very capable of, in the intermediate, middle, and short range route tree. He's capable of being effective there and has the footwork and things like that. I think he's going to be a fun watch in a pretty wide open, outside of Coleman. I would say a pretty wide open receiver room. But going back to Crutchfield makes that decision to transfer a bit more puzzling, because even before the addition of Coleman, obviously you look at Josh Manning and Marquise Johnson and point your fingers at them and say those are probably two guys you would expect to be at the top of the list. And Coleman obviously now kind of propels himself there, but I would think it's a pretty wide open spot. So I guess now Coleman solves that need of a solid receiver one guy. But yeah, I mean, you really hit the nail on the head. He's quick, but good route runner, and is going to fit well in that same role. I think regardless of who's throwing him the ball. But yeah, I think he's going to fit, well in that same role that Luther Burden played.
Right. And I think we agreed upon when we were going through the offense and at wide receiver, like there's definitely a lot of talent there, but they really needed someone who is proven. And so I'm really excited to watch the development of Joshua Manning, Marquise Johnson, Daniel Blood, James Madison. But none of those guys have ever been the number one guy at the college level. So gotta love the addition of Kevin Coleman. At running back, they add Ahmad Hardy from Louisiana Monroe. And this is what you're talking about, Michael. FC or lower conference guy, Sunbelt Freshman of the Year. 1,300 yard season. Top 4 running back available in the transfer portal. Just an absolute bruiser of a running back. 5'10", 205, and honestly, he looks thicker than that. So I mean, you watch this guy's tape. He had the only player who had more broken tackles than him in college football this past season was Ashton Jeanty. So that's pretty good company there. Really excited to see him pair up with Jamal Roberts. Jamal, a little more a lighter guy, but can still do pass pro, obviously, and probably better as a receiver, I'd assume, than Hardy. So I think this is going to be a really exciting duo. Drinkwitz has always ran with a running back tandem, never really, besides Cody Schrader in 2023, never really just one alpha guy. So Jamal Roberts and Ahmad Hardy kind of seeming to be the two guys for this season. Michael, what do you think about Ahmad?
Yeah, I mean, I had heard that he was and read that he was visiting, which was exciting and a bit surprising. I think a lot of the talk the day before Q and Lacey transferred or announced he was transferring, Army running back Kanye Udo announced that he was transferring, and there was a very quick graphic out there that his first visit would be to Missouri. I don't know if that's still happening or has happened or what the status of that is, but I think that was kind of where everyone's vision focused, especially after Lacey transferred. Both were productive, but I mean, yeah, Hardy, he had 94 broken tackles this year, and he bounces off defenders, but has that speed as well. I guess there's just something about Eli Drinkwitz and Sunbelt running backs. Obviously, he brought in 2 last year, and it didn't, it worked out pretty well, I'd say. So, yeah, I alluded to this at the very beginning of the episode. He still has 3 years of eligibility, and that's a common theme amongst most of these guys that we'll go over in a little bit. But he is one of 3 freshmen, and 2 of those are red shirts. But still, I mean, that is not a bad thing to have guys who can still grow into their, presumably grow into their role with Missouri and continue to contribute for multiple seasons. So that's the thing that stands out the most to me. I mean, this isn't a 1 year guy, right? You bring in Marcus Carroll and Nate Noel, but you're only getting them for one season, and you know that. And I'm not gonna, be so stern when I say Ahmad Hardy's going to be here for 3 more years, but you have that opportunity for him to be for 3 more years. And, obviously it's a step up in competition from the Sun Belt to the SEC, but Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll bended pretty well for themselves. And, there's going to be a growing aspect, especially because he only has 1 season of college football under his belt. But I mean, the 3 years left with Hardy is really, really an exciting thing. And it's a smart move to do in the transfer portal for Drinkwitz to fill an important hole with a guy who's already productive, but could be there for multiple more seasons.
Absolutely. I mean, we talked about at the top just the uncertainty from your roster year to year, but you have, like you said, the possibility of Jamal Roberts and Ahmad Hardy both have 3 years of eligibility left. So that's another positive for them there. They have 2 really talented freshmen coming in too. So just have to give yourself as much options as possible. So that's it for the offense side of now. Michael, I want to talk about the quarterback position here because obviously they lose out on Miller Moss, the USC quarterback. Malik Murphy, the Duke quarterback, out of the portal too. He's going to Oregon State. So I want to say their options are thinning, but certainly they were a favorite for Miller Moss. They're having a few other guys on visits. Bo Perbula from Penn State visited earlier this week, and then Fernando Mendoza. Has there been any reported interest from Missouri and Fernando?
So that's kind of the interesting thing. I mean, there's interest there, but from what I've been able to hear, his recruitment's been pretty under wraps.
Okay.
They don't even know if he's taken any visits yet, so makes it kind of, it's possible that he has, and I would imagine at this point he's been in the portal for a couple of weeks, I guess a week and a half, 2 weeks. So I would imagine he's been on visits, but I feel like it would be known if he'd been here.
Yeah, exactly. Perbula, I mean, he is a part of a larger conversation with what do these guys do that are on playoff teams. And not everyone is as generous as Kenny Dillingham with Arizona State and his mindset about it. But I think if you're a quarterback, I mean, you gotta enter the portal and find your home as quick as you can. So for Bo specifically too, he's Penn State's backup to Drew Eller, who's returning for next season. But he also had a role this season as kind of what I like to think about how the 49ers used Trey Lance for a few years under Jimmy Garoppolo. I'm not putting in comparisons, but just kind of similar running guy, can throw the ball as kind of a mix-up situation. So we all have to say hasn't started because he's been behind Eller for all these years. But Michael, what can you tell us about Perbula? Again, visited earlier this week with Missouri.
Yeah, like usual, you hit the nail on the head. He's athletic, and they use him in a lot of running packages. But he threw for 275 yards, 5 touchdowns, and an interception when he was throwing the ball. So he doesn't have necessarily the production, I think, that you would immediately look for a guy who's presumably going to be your starting quarterback. But like you said, I think it's a fair assessment to say that options are thinning, and I we don't really know what's going on, in the quarterback hunt. Like I said, Mendoza's been a guy that's been kind of under wraps so far, and Perbula visited Missouri. He visited earlier in the week. He's visited Iowa, UCF, and is visiting Ole Miss. Just reading a 24/7 report for that. So he's making his rounds. Iowa has a guy at quarterback, so I'm not ruling that out, but that maybe seems unrealistic. I'd like to think Missouri and Ole Miss are 2 pretty appealing spots. I don't know what Ole Miss has on their roster right now for quarterback and who else they're looking at, but something to consider. But I mean, Prabilla's athletic, and I would imagine it would add a very unique, diverse aspect to the Missouri offense. Now, that being said, he has that running talent, and it can open up more of a possibility for more design runs and options and things like that. But the way this offense works, there's going to be an expectation that he's going to throw the football, right, and throw it down the field and find his talented group of receivers. And not that he's not capable of that. We just don't really know what he's capable of or not capable of yet. So something to consider. I mean, I think it'd be a fun addition, and you look at the list of quarterbacks, they're waiting, right? And it's possible that there are still guys who enter who are in the playoff or who are still have to play a bowl game. So that's a possibility. And maybe Missouri knows, right? Maybe they have a guy in mind and they're waiting for him to hit the portal and they're going to pounce on him. But right now, it really seems like Pribula and Mendoza, and even Mendoza, I don't think anyone can really speak much to what his plans are. He has connections across the country. I think his younger brother plays quarterback for Indiana. So there's that, I guess. But yeah, I mean, that's really all I could say. Prabula right now, I'm not going to say there's any favorites, but if you were to throw one name out there that's the most realistic, it'd probably be him. But I think the level of production, he's had this season and the one before isn't concerning, but it's just a giant question mark. And if you bring a guy like him in, I think there's still room for a quarterback battle with the guys you have on the roster now, whether that's Sam Horn and no one's really talked about Drew Pine. So that's another name to keep in mind, right? Not that, he had the best or worst season, but he did do some good things for Missouri at times. So I like to think if there is a quarterback battle with a guy like Prabula, I'd like to think that he would have a shot. But I think if just my opinion, if Mendoza's the guy and he ends up coming to Missouri, I think he is the set in stone starter. And Prabula would present himself that way, but there might be room for a battle. But there's a whole lot of nothing right now on either of them, so it's gonna be crickets until we see an official announcement. I'd like to think.
I'll tell you what, if Bo ends up going to either of Missouri or Iowa, then the Music City Bowl gets a lot more interesting, at least for Twitter fodder. I don't think the players care, but for Twitter fodder, at least, stakes get higher. But yeah, you mentioned Sam Horn and Drew Pine, and with Sam, it's really difficult to tell where he fits into this. I think he's going to be given a shot. I mean, depending on who they end up getting, I think if it's Prabula, he probably ends up getting a shot to compete for that starting job, and maybe more fair than the shot he supposedly got in 2023 to compete for it. I think he has to be viewed under a microscope by the staff for how he's throwing with that shoulder surgery. Tommy John surgery is not one where you obviously can just come back and throw just the same way you did before. He obviously hasn't gotten an opportunity before, so not really sure what he's capable of. But I do think there is a tendency with transfer portal for fans to kind of just glom onto what's new. Sam Horn was 4-star prospect, so we'll see what he has there. And Drew Pine, yeah, I know a lot of fans, probably not a popular option with him. It's been a while since he was the starting quarterback, obviously. But I would say, depending on what the conversation looks like at quarterback for Missouri this offseason, I think it'd be important to not let his performances this season color how you judge him. Obviously, you have to take it into account, and there was some just straight up ugly passes that he had, but also to have a full season starting under his, or full off season, at least getting more number one reps, if that's the case, preparing to be the starter would be a lot different situation. So quarterback situation is really interesting for Missouri right now. Obviously, that's their biggest need remaining. If they want to add one, Eli Drinkwitz said yesterday, if we need to add a quarterback, we will. If we don't, we won't. So we'll see where they go with that. I've seen a lot of people talk about just kind of the politics of if they don't add a quarterback when they clearly been interested in adding one, then the politics of going to Sam Horn and being like, hey, we couldn't find anyone. You want to do this? So we'll see. We'll see what their moves they end up making there. After quarterback, it's the three starters they have to replace along the offensive line. We talked about before, kind of the shuffling they could do, especially with Kevin Green. So we'll see what Missouri has cooking on the offensive side of the ball. I would be shocked though if there's not a lot more coming after just Coleman and Hardy. Moving things over to the defensive side of the ball, this is where the bulk of Missouri's additions have came through. 5 of them. The newest one today being Mose Phillips from Virginia Tech. And then they also added Santana Banner, safety from Illinois, or Northern Illinois. You have Josiah Trotter from Western Illinois, and then Mekhi Gabia from Nebraska. And then finally, Langdon Kitchen, a local prospect from Northwest Missouri State at defensive end. Start with the Nebraska linebacker. I will just say before we get into any analysis of all of these guys, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. Eli Drinkwitz yesterday was asked offhand how to pronounce his name. Didn't have a clue. So Michael is from Nebraska. What are your sources telling you? How do we pronounce this linebacker's last name?
I believe it's Mekhi Bayor with a silent G, but
okay.
I've been wrong before and I'll be wrong again. But that's how it reads to me in my mind, and I think I've heard that on broadcasts. So maybe we can roll with that.
Okay, that works. So, like we said at the top, crossing off their 2 biggest needs in the portal at linebacker and safety. I mean, with all of these guys, I think the trend, besides with Bayer from Nebraska, with all of these guys from Trotter, Banner, Phillips, Kitchen, like you've been mentioning, this theme of lower conference guys, a lot of them have good amount of eligibility left, but that have been productive. Josiah Trotter was the Big 12 defensive freshman of the year, or defensive player of the year. So they've been making moves there. Michael, what is your just kind of general thoughts on these defensive additions?
Trotter, in my opinion, is probably the most impressive addition out of all these guys, and there was pretty tough competition to land him too. I mean, 93 tackles, 2 pass deflections, and an interception, and half a sack. So I think that kind of shows off his range of versatility, that he can drop back a little bit and do a little bit of pass coverage, but he can also get at the quarterback. He's a big physical guy, 6'2", 238. So that's a really fun addition. Mekhi Bayor is a little, I think Trotter's probably a little more of a unique, inside middle linebacker. From when I've watched, Nebraska this year and watching some film on him after that commitment was announced, it looks like he could play off the edge a little bit more, but also has that traditional, middle linebacker feel to him. So 2 fun players there. I would like to think those are great replacements for Chuck Hicks and Corey Flagg. Maybe, even a little bit better of an outlook, especially when you can return Khalil Jacobs and Nick Rodriguez. So that room is going to be set for next year at least, hopefully longer. Trotter, I think, is going to be an excellent player. That's a really fun addition. Mose Phillips was one that I think I told you earlier when he announced that commitment. I was actually pretty surprised. I didn't know they were going after him. I knew there were safeties they were pursuing that they didn't land, so it made sense that they, that the coaching staff would pivot. But he finished with 65 tackles, sack, forced fumble, and an interception. So again, he has range and shown he can do it. He's only a sophomore, so he has experience in the ACC. He was a starter this year. He started, I think, 2 games as a freshman last year. So he's got experience since day one. So that's never any complaints there. And then Santana Banner. I actually had the opportunity to talk to Banner the day he announced his commitment later that day. Great kid. Sometimes it's fun to think that these guys are the same age as us, or little bit younger. But yeah, big physical safety, 6'3", 202 pounds, and same theme. He's a freshman, so 54 tackles, a forced fumble, interception. that 6'3" size really is what intrigues me. And when I asked him, what is your play style? How would you describe yourself? The first thing that came out of his mouth was physicality. Whether it's in coverage or tackling, just a physical football player. He hits hard, all that good stuff. Talked about the little details a lot too. Refining footwork and tackling angles and things like that. So he seems to have a really high knowledge of the game. And he obviously, he recapped his visit and things like that and everything with me. He seems to have found a home, and family was a big thing for him too. So good addition there. Langton Kitchen, I mentioned this to you, Joey. Local guy. I covered West Strand last year, and I was like, oh, who are there any? Do they have any guys playing college football? And I looked him up, and he looked productive, but clearly he stepped it up to a whole nother level. He finished with 21 tackles and eight and a half for loss, and then 5.5 sacks. So productive. Obviously, Northwest Missouri State is a bit of a step down, division wise, but still a good football team. And he had a productive season. He's big, 6'7", 270, and my initial thought was maybe this is a interior guy, but it sounds like he comes off the edge and plays on the outside, which is impressive for a guy that size. So I don't know if this is more of a depth piece or if that's a guy they project to come in and start, or what the idea looks like that. I would also imagine that they're still looking for another guy to come off the edge, maybe one with a little more Power 5 or FBS experience. But I look across the board, and besides Bayor, you have guys with multiple years of eligibility, 2 freshmen and two sophomores, I believe. So that is really, really, really ideal. They've all proven that they can be productive. So really, 5 really, really good additions on the side of the ball by Eli Drinkwitz and his staff.
Yeah, the edge position is kind of what sticks out to me too. Interesting that you mentioned Bayer has some of that flexibility. It's difficult to get a really good read on Kitchen, honestly. But as we talked about before, I mean, we kind of agreed that defensive end was a place where they would need to add before when Ari and then Jalen Brown both left, and now definitely true. So that feels like the next move on the defensive end or defense side of the ball. Josiah Trotter is a little bit bigger than what they typically go for an inside linebacker. I mean, he got so be interested to see exactly where he lines up. But I mean, just going down the roster for the guys they had played for them this past year, 5'10", 233 was Corey Flagg, or 233. Josiah Trotter was 6'2", 238, and Corey Flagg was the biggest guy in that room. And obviously, with 3 less inches of height, he's a little bit more compact. Tristan Newson, 6'2", 223. Brian Huff, 6'2", 217. Jeremiah Beasley is a bigger guy, 6 foot, 228. Nicholas Rodriguez, 6 foot, 208. Cleo Jacobs, 6'1", 222. Chuck Hicks, 6'1", 227. So Josiah Trotter is definitely a bigger guy. And I will say, I'm not defensive player of the year for Big 12, defensive freshman of the year. But all these guys are productive. So interested to see what they can really turn into, and hard to judge. I mean, like you mentioned with the running back position, you have to pursue guys that are productive, that have experience, but can they make that jump to the SEC? So being productive on the defense side of the ball, Mizzou has in the transfer portal, and I'd imagine they're still going to look for a few guys there, especially at edge, like we mentioned. I think that's all we have on the football end of things today. Play against Iowa in the Music City Bowl on December 30th. We will be there in Nashville. Excited for that. But switching things over to basketball, have their second most important game in the non-conference coming up, at least rivalry-wise, against Illinois this Sunday. Should be an exciting one. I'm not sure what the odds were, what the spread was last time, but Mizzou is 6-point underdogs in this game. It's been interesting to watch Mizzou's rise in the AP poll voting these past 2 weeks after beating Kansas. The first week the poll came out after they beat Kansas, Missouri was voted as high as 9th. I didn't look at the ballots this time around, but I believe they were 26th, 27th in voting, and then Illinois was one spot behind them. Illinois, though, I, I, it's hard to see. I think people are basing Illinois' ranking and they're voting a lot still on that loss to Northwestern because Illinois just went toe to toe with the number one team in the nation, Tennessee, lost 66-64. They have a win over Wisconsin. They have a 22 point or 23-point win over Arkansas, but then they had a loss to Alabama earlier in the season. So they've had some really tough opponents. Illinois is tied for first in the nation in rebounding. They lost Terrence Shannon Jr. obviously, but this is just a blue blood of college basketball that is going to recruit year in and year out. So have some stars there that are definitely going to be a challenge for Missouri. Michael, just what do you make of this Illinois basketball team? I know in the Big Ten, so not in either of your realms, but any thoughts on the Illini?
Yeah, I mean, blatantly obvious statement. This is a pretty good basketball team, and they are really, really big, either tall and lanky or physical at each position. Their point guard, and I'm gonna butcher the heck out of this guy's name. I believe it's Kasparis Jakušionis. He's an international point guard that just me as an NBA draft guy, I followed and I was intrigued by when he made that official that he was coming to the United States to play college basketball. Heck of a player. He's averaging 16 points, 6 boards, and 6 assists. That's going to be a guy that is looking at a pretty high NBA draft pick. It still seems like he is getting used to the physicality a little bit of college basketball, and he makes freshman decisions. Tomislav Ivisic is another international guy. He's a sophomore forward center that can shoot it from the outside and get you inside as well. Kind of a surprise guy. He's averaging 14 and 10. Very good player. Will Riley is another true freshman. Again, super that kind of more traditional what we're seeing, now like a lankier guard / forward. He's 6'8", 190. Kind of this guy that can go on a heater. He might get you 5 in a game off the bench, or he might give you 30. He's done both frequently. So a little inconsistent, but not a guy you want to let get going. And then the depth just goes down the list. Kylan Boswell, I think he's a pretty well-established college basketball guard. So they have guys that go down the roster. They're big and they're physical. So I'm really intrigued, and I think there's some favorable matchups. Missouri's shooting better from the perimeter, so that's something to keep an eye on. Illinois turns the ball over a little bit more, so that's something to keep an eye on. But just not letting their guys get hot is going to be really important. I think at this point, we now know. I mean, we know now, what this Missouri team could do offensively when it's at its best. They have anybody on this roster for the most part can give you buckets on any given night, which I think is really impressive. Last year we talked about depth and how Dennis Gates had 14, 15 guys that he could play, but it was just kind of scrapped, thrown together and ugly, and a lot of guys fighting for their own shots. And this is just a cohesive basketball team, unselfish basketball team. I think a lot of that has to do with Ant Robinson, but they're more cohesive and everyone has a more distinguished, defined role. But everyone in some way, shape, or form can score the ball. We've seen Trent Pierce come off the bench a couple times and have some good games. They're still missing Caleb Grill, but he could do it when he was around. Marquez Warwick has done it off the bench. He's come in. Obviously, Jacob Cruz was kind of the savior of the Jacksonville State game earlier this week, where he comes in and has 16, 17 points and hits 4 or 5 threes. So everyone can score, which is a blessing, I guess. And someone's going to have to do it, and that depth is going to be important. Illinois has a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-man rotation, and Missouri's is what, 13, 14. So that depth always helps against a bigger, physical, stronger, very athletic team in Illinois. Unpredictable outcome, really. I think Missouri can beat you in so many different ways. They can get inside and to the mid-range areas, and they can also, burn you from the outside. So Illinois is a good defensive team. Missouri is also a good defensive team. I think these two teams match up pretty well together, so I'm intrigued.
Yeah, you mentioned Illinois' physicality, and I feel like Missouri would just match up so much better with a team like that this season compared to last, specifically with Josh Gray holding the anchor down in the center, and then Anthony Robinson for what he can do as facilitator. I mean, in in the non-con games specifically, like Ant Robinson's ability to step into the paint and then ditch the ball out to the perimeter, it just jumps off the page. And there are so many more guys who can shoot the three more efficiently this season. Even Trent Pierce, forget what non-con game it was, kind of just all blends together at this point. Trent Pierce had a really good showing from free. So yeah, I mean, just general question, how much better do you think Missouri can match up with a more physical team with their playing style?
I mean, you really said it. Josh Gray, Peyton Marshall, those guys, Aiden Shaw, um, play physical and are better rebounders and can just body guys up. Ivisic is a bigger dude, but I don't know how tough and physical he is in the paint. I know he likes to shoot it a little bit from the perimeter, which actually might cause a bit of a matchup problem for a Josh Gray, for a Peyton Marshall. Might be more of a Josh Gray or Aiden Shaw game. Um, I look at a guy like Kylan Boswell, who is one of Illinois' guards, and he's 200 pounds, so that's a more physical guard that Missouri's going to have to figure out how to match up with. It's going to be an important game for Tamar Bates, Ant Robinson, Tony Perkins. I think we'll see a lot of. Not that we haven't recently, but he's obviously 6'4", 200, 215 pounds. That sort of thing. He's a more physical, defensive-minded guard that I think is going to be able to put away a guy like Boswell. Trey White's another example. He plays guard, but he's 6'7", 205. So he's practically a forward with a guard skill set. So I think they're a matchup. They're good matchups though. Like I said, Perkins is a good one. I think Warwick can do it. Robinson isn't the biggest, but he's just such a creative and reliable defender. I don't think that's going to cause any issues. It does make you worry more about a guy like Trent Pierce or someone like that who's a little on the thinner side and going up against fast, strong guards and forwards. Might not be the best matchup, but you might see Marcus Allen. He fits into that, kind of mid, small forward, power forward, 6'7", 200 pounds role that can obviously, prides himself on defending. So there are good matchups. Yeah, I mean, there are really good matchups on both sides, and I think Missouri can match that physicality, and it goes beyond height and weight. I mean, those are just the numbers we have on paper, but we've seen these Missouri guys defend at a high level on the ball. So I think that's that's proof there too that they can do it. Especially, I mean, you look at against Kansas, right? I mean, they had physical guards. Cal had guys that could really get to the rim. Jacksonville State's lead guard, Pierre, was 6'5", 200 pounds, so he was a bigger guard. So they've and Jacksonville State in general was a really physical team. Their center was pushing 300 pounds. So that was a kind of a good test of physicality, I guess, all across the board. And I wouldn't say they handled business because it was a little shaky at times, but you get the idea. They've shown now that they can stop and go on runs and score and defend against those bigger, stronger teams.
You mentioned that Cal game and just how they were able to almost match that physicality. And the whole game plan for them in that second half was just to be able to get to the free throw line, extend the time they had to overcome that deficit. And the whole game plan for them in that was to play closer to the rim and draw those fouls. And they were able to do that successfully. And I think what they've also been able to do this season, granted, we've only seen them, the two toughest competition has been Memphis and Kansas, and this Illinois game is going to be, again, a really good measuring stick. They've been able to control the pace. You look at that Kansas game, and in the first half, like this was not a case of the game was close the whole time, and then Missouri just, got lucky at the end. Like, they jumped out to that lead early on. Kansas looked lost for most of that first half. And a big part of that was Missouri knocking down their shots early and then forcing those turnovers. So definitely something promising there for Illinois to be a turnover-prone team. They're averaging 11 turnovers per game. And then also you look at, I mean, being able to sink 3-point shots specifically helps a lot with momentum, controlling the pace early on. Last year, I was just looking at it. Missouri missed 16 of their first 17 3-point shots against Illinois. So from that point on, I mean, they just were drowning that whole entire game against Illinois. So if they can, that those first 10 minutes, usually it's the middle 8 minutes that really determine how Dennis Gates' team is going to perform. But I feel like the first 10 minutes are going to be really important to decide, can they stay in this game? And then anything can happen from there. So I think this is an exciting matchup. Like for the reason you mentioned, I think Missouri matches much better up with Illinois, and Vegas agrees. So I've just been thinking on how much this would mean for Dennis Gates. Obviously, they're 6-point underdogs, but how much it would mean for this program momentum wise to get a win over Kansas and Illinois. Something that Dennis Gates has never done, beat their two biggest rivals in the non-con in the same year. To go into conference play, starting off January 4th against Zummeren, really tough matchup, and I don't think anybody's going to fault them for losing that game. I mean, depending on their performance, and a really tough SEC. But to get those two, especially in a season where some tough decisions are probably going to have to be made for the tournament in the SEC, I think Missouri having two really strong statement wins would really help them just in this season and their resume wise, but also just for Dennis Gates to really turn the page from that last season. I mean, I wouldn't say it's as important if you're Missouri's basketball coach as it is for Ryan Day to beat Michigan, but it is certainly something that you have to do. And upsetting both those teams in the same season as underdogs both times would be huge. So that's what I'm looking forward to this weekend. Any final thoughts, Michael, on this basketball game?
Really quick, when you look at these bubble teams, and I would throw Missouri on the NCAA tournament bubble right now. Obviously, we're so far out from that, and so much can happen. But those early resume builders are really do end up making a difference, especially when you're deciding between SEC teams. I mean, the SEC is ridiculously good this year, and it's going to weed itself out, and there's going to be levels. A couple games into it, obviously you're going to know who's real and who's not real. But to have Cal, Kansas, and Illinois under your belt is going to be impressive. And even if Missouri does lose to Illinois, it's impressive to just play well or keep the game close, because you're not going to get a resume builder, but you're going to get a testament to the growth of this team and what they're capable of doing. So it's impressive to just keep the score close, whether it's a win or loss, I think, just so you know where this team's at. It's going to be a great evaluator heading into SEC play, because if you thought the schedule was hard now, it's about to get 10 times worse, because like we were mentioning, it looks like every team in the SEC this year can beat any team in the SEC, which is dangerous. And even, guys you'd look at like a bottom feeder, which, maybe throw Missouri in that category. Missouri looks good this year. Vanderbilt has had a good start to their season. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to, off the top of my head, to pinpoint a bad team. And another important thing to note is a lot of SEC teams have a lot of really impressive non-conference, resume building wins. So in order to just stick around and compete and have something to their name, having those 3 wins, including Illinois, would be really, really, really important.
Absolutely. Really looking forward to that game. Obviously, the border war for whatever place it's at, either Lawrence or Columbia, is obviously an incredible environment. But from covering the Braggin Rights game last season, anybody who has ever been there can attest to this, I'm sure. It just, the feeling of it being like a soccer match in another country where they have split audiences and everybody is just living or dying on every single shot for their opposing teams. So especially being from St. Louis and just kind of having it is a very like split poll of Missouri and Illinois fans. I wouldn't say there's much hatred that I feel, but definitely a split area. So excited for this game on Sunday. Should be competitive. They've split the last two. So as you mentioned, Michael, going to be a good showing. I mean, we'll find out what this Missouri team is made of. I think again in their last real test from the non-con. So looking forward to it. We'll have coverage all day Sunday and that Braggin Rights game. We appreciate you tuning in to this episode, and we hope you tune into the rest of our coverage over at Missouri Tigers on SI.